give an overview of the project. This is a new initiative for us and kind of the process, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. But you can also, as things occur to you, feel free to post questions in the chat. Some of them we may answer as we go, or we may come back to them at the end of the presentation. So allow me to share my screen here. All right. Can folks see the slides now? Thumbs up. Wonderful. So welcome. I'm delighted to be here to give you some information about this new initiative on science engagement for congregational flourishing. I know many of you are familiar with AAAS and DOZER, but just to give you a little bit of background, we are part of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, which is the world's largest general scientific member society. So it incorporates scientists from all scientific disciplines. And we're best known for publishing the science family of journals. It includes Science and Science Advances, Science Signaling, Science Robotics. But AAAS also has a very robust programmatic arm. And we do programs that range from working with judges and people and lawyers and people in human rights, to working on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in science, to getting information to journalists about scientific topics. Our mission is to advance science and serve society. As part of that mission, among other programs, AAAS established the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion in 1995 to facilitate conversation and engagement between scientific and religious communities, recognizing, of course, that these often overlap. And we do a number of different projects that support this mission. And you can see here a picture of our current staff. On the call with us today, and you will hear from soon, is Curtis Baxter, who's our Senior Program Associate and heads up many of our science and theological education initiatives, and Leif Castron, a Program Associate with DOZER, who also works on those programs. Lila Sloan Barrett is our Communications Associate. She is out right now on parental leave, but if you are part of this program, you will hear a lot from her. And Rachel Klein heads up our work engaging with scientists and helping to provide resources for scientists to feel more comfortable and confident in engaging with religious communities. So, as I mentioned, we have a number of different projects that we do as part of our program, and you can find lots of great information about them at our various websites, and I will put those links in the chat as well. But in addition to projects like the one we're talking about today, we also, as I mentioned, we have workshops for scientists. We have a number of wonderful print and video resources and other opportunities, public events, and other opportunities for engagement. So this current project is part of a grant that we have received through the Lilly Endowment. Now, you may or may not be familiar with the Lilly Endowment. If you are part of theological education, you probably are familiar with Lilly. They do a lot of funding for theological education and congregational flourishing. And this project is funded through their Thriving Congregations initiative. The goal of that initiative is to help congregations thrive by strengthening their ministries that help people deepen their relationships with God, enhance their connections with each other, and contribute to the flourishing of their communities and the world. This is the first grant we've received through the Lilly Endowment, and we're very excited about it. But of course, we are a science society. So a lot of the things in here that have to do with helping people deepen their relationships with God and and strengthening ministries are things that we are supporting other organizations to do, like potentially you. And one of the ways we're doing that through this project is through grants. So our project is called Science Engagement for Congregational Flourishing. And the goal is to resource and equip congregational leaders, both clergy and lay, to engage with critical issues at the intersection of science and society within their congregations and communities. If COVID taught us anything, it was that congregational leaders are often on the front lines of issues that involve the intersection of science and society. They end up having to be science interpreters, science policymakers, science influencers, but many of them may not have the resources or background to feel comfortable doing that. And so our goal with this project is to provide resources through lifelong learning and continuing education programs to help equip clergy and other congregational leaders to be able to lead their community faithfully in these issues. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Curtis to talk a little bit about some work we've done that precedes this and how this project is going to be structured.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So all the bugs are out. Good. Thank you, Katie, so much for the introduction. First, I'd like to thank all the folks who are attending. It's good to see some familiar faces as well as new faces, and that's always wonderful and exciting. And so I'll give a little background to why are we here, and then talk a little bit about the project overview and give some examples of the previous pilot project, and then go from there and hand it over to my colleague as well. So just give you some little examples. So how we got here so all this is built upon, and Katie mentioned one of our projects, the Science for Seminary project, which focused on theological education. A number of you are familiar with it. You mentioned it. And the big thrust of that was to integrate science into core theological courses and host at least one public event. And this pilot project of science and continuing education for pastors came on the heels of the end of that Science for Sim project. And we thought to ourselves, what is the next logical step for our science engagement adventure? And it was with pastors and ministers who are already trained and who are out there in their own vocations, and then for lay folks as well. And so what is the best avenue to bring them science into their own communities, their own contexts? And then it was thought of that we do this through continuing education. And we just took the model, we did it quite simply, took the model of the Cypher Sim, and we said, okay, we had 4 schools we like to work with. As you see there, Andover Newton at Yale Divinity School, Columbia Theological Seminary, Concordia Seminary in St. Louis, and Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. And we worked with these schools and said, here's a $12,500 to do what I just mentioned, to do in their own context, in their own projects. As I reflect, two communities that were left out of this, now think about it, is historically Black theological institutions and Roman Catholic as well. And so knowing this going forward, we'll want to make sure that we include those voices into this new grant as well. And as you can see, there's a little picture there of a report that came out of this as well. And I think Katie mentioned she'll be putting links to the report as well as to the resource hubs that you'll see some of the project pieces there as well. Next slide, please. So moving forward to SECF, which I'll call from now instead of Science Engagement for Congregational Flourishing. This is, as you can tell, it's quite different. The previous project was $12,500 for 1 year. And you'll see what those projects did within that 1 year of their funding. This it's a bigger grant here, 10 to 25,000 for 24 months for 2 years. And the focus of it is a little bit different. It's still focused on continuing education, lifelong learning, but it's really focused on helping, equipping, resourcing, and empowering congregational leaders, both clergy and lay, to be able to wrestle, to be able to engage with science topics and technology topics at the intersection of science and society within their own communities and congregations as well. So this is quite different. You hear, this is just a brief overview. You hear more about the project, the framework, and all the ins out of it from my colleague Leaf here a little bit later on. Next slide, please. So starting with the pilot projects as mentioned. So these pilot projects were carried out between 2017, 2018. So before the pandemic and going virtual and online, but you'll see within some of these that they are already doing this. And most of y'all are probably already doing this before the pandemic as well, understanding that the landscape and how you create courses and how you engage with students in those courses is quite dynamic there. Okay, so starting off with Andover Newton, they focused on one theme, which is theology and medicine, and that's fine, however you want to frame your projects. But they were really thoughtful, and why they did that was because of who was a part of that project. So something I like to mention is always know who was in your network, so leverage your network in that regard. So you had Dr. Mike Heim and Dr. Ben Doolittle. Dr. Ben Doolittle was the medical doctor. He's a pediatric doctor as well. I think he's the head of pediatrics up there at the Yale School of Medicine up there, and he was very instrumental in bringing all this together along with Dr. Heim there. They focused on a number of topics within that overall umbrella framework of theology and medicine. So healing the healers, so talking about clergy burnout, pain and suffering, as well as other topics in regards to talking about the history of theology and medicine, or religion and medicine as well. And they did a science enrichment course due to who they had in their project. Dr. Ben Doolittle, they went to a cranial lab and looked at skulls and talked about the importance of that exercise, as well as having a public event that was focused on theology and medicine. And one thing I would like to mention is that although you hope that you bring local folks to your projects, the Andover Newton was quite unique because a number of it was in person as well, and it was in person once a month, I think for 6 months if I remember correctly. The folks who were part of that project all commuted in to New Haven. There were some came as far south as Fayetteville, North Carolina, some from Jersey. There's even a Air Force chaplain all the way from Germany who came in once a month to be a part of this project. And they just very fascinated with, hearing this topic, as well as getting a certificate from this project and being from Yale Divinity School as well. So that carried a little bit of breath with it as well. So always think about your audience and your context as well in regards to your projects. The second project here is Columbia Theological Seminary, which did a in-person workshop which focused on the spiritual brain, which was done by she's a neuroscientist who later on became a pastor there in the PCUSA church, and she was relied upon for that topic there, as well as the biodiversity in the book of Job. If you're familiar with Hebrew Bible scholars, they have Bill Brown there, and it's his area. So always thinking about who is in your network and who can you bring in to sort of bring out a topic that you want to talk about, or maybe a topic you haven't thought about as well. And they did an online course on the spiritual brain, which is, I think, if I remember correctly, a 12-week course. And Dr. Sherratt, who is a neuroscientist who became a pastor, she led that course as well. And so thinking about who do you have, leveraging in your own network and the context in regards to who do you have as specialists within your community as well. Next slide, please. Next, we have Concordia Seminary, and they really focused on, and their title, their project was what pastors need to know about theology in the age, in a scientific age. This is I think without most of our projects, one of the most conservative communities that we work with. And it was always a pleasure to go there and be with them. I've attended all these projects and all their functions. They're part of the Lutheran Church and Missouri Synod. And they've focused on how to help communicate science, not just to those who participated. There was an in-person workshop there, but also how to give those tools and those skills to those who attend the workshop. So when they go out into back to their own congregations, how to help their congregants to walk through these issues of creation and the Big Bang and the beginning of the universe and age of the universe there. So each context and each school focused on something quite different in regards to what they thought their communities needed. So it's a very important thing to keep in mind. They enlisted someone from, I think it was Purdue. She was a physicist there who did the public lecture. They're focused on the age of the universe and how to, she used a little, a chromatic piece of film. You talk about wavelengths and things like that. It's quite fascinating and awesome just to do simple things like that to sort of convey the science to folks. And then lastly, the project at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, and they had a speaker series there. Dr. Helen Blyer led that one. But what she did, she didn't create a speaker series. They already had this community and conversation speaker series ongoing. And so she just sort of plugged in the speaker series on you see the topics there, AI and machine learning. So they were pretty much talking about AI before it was cool to talk about AI. And they did that through two partnerships, one with Google there in Pittsburgh and another one with Carnegie Mellon. So that I tell you that just to think about potential partnerships within your area, who you can work with, who can you bring in as experts into your own projects to think of to talk about these scientific topics. You may be a scientist yourself, you may not be, but think about who can I bring in locally or virtually across the country that you can think about these projects as well. And then also reminds me of oh, that's fine, you can stay there, that's fine. It also reminds me another point of thinking about outside organizations that are there and that can you potentially partner with. So here's a part of this pilot project, and as well as part of this SECF project, we had an evaluation piece here that we did through a sociologist who we contracted out to. And throughout the project was 565 lay leaders, clergy were part of this, but I would say it's a little bit more than that because the theology and medicine course is ongoing still up there, Andover, Newton, and Columbia and Pittsburgh kept redoing, had new iterations of their online courses as well there at Pittsburgh. So I imagine it's probably about 700 or 800 now. And you see some of these statistics here about how let me see here. Attendees believe clergy should be, and 90% of attendees believe that other clergy should see these projects as well, should be a part of these projects as well. Then you have this bar graph here on the bottom left, and these are interviews, these are surveys as well as in-person interviews too. So I should put that out there too. Attendees interested in future programs like this, and you see how the bar graph goes up there, and in that regard, Pittsburgh 100%. Wow. And then you have the middle graph there in regards to participants and their views on the conflict narrative. And so it was up in some, and then all of them minimized across the board. It was higher in the one, which is Andover Newton, and I have probably some reasons why that's the case, and I can talk about those offline if you like to. And then lastly is the, I can't see that there. Oh, there we go. Wonderful. It moved over there. And so likelihood of a participant connecting with a scientist, someone outside of their own specialty to talk about these issues. And as you see, that went up as well. This is why we show this, is to tell the story that it is important, and there's a desire to have these type of programming within congregational leadership within these types of programs, and that it does help pastors, lay leaders, and the like to be more comfortable and empowered to talk about these things more and to find resources outside of themselves. They might even finally figure it out, like, oh, I've got a number of scientists with my own congregation. Why not lean on them and bring them into conversations and to program within their own church settings and the like, and other religious type settings as well. So I hope that's very helpful there, just to give you a hint that this is something that is empowering, it does move the needle, and that is would be helpful, maybe encourage more participation in your programs and the like. Next slide, please. So sort of recentering back to the overview here of to the SECF. Once again, it's a 10,000, 25,000 K project for 24 months, which is focused on equipping and resourcing and empowering congregational leaders, both clergy and lay leaders, to be able to discuss, address, and be able to have a conversation with their own congregants in their own communities and congregations and the like. Next slide, please. And my last slide here for me, it would be resources. So we are definitely, Dozer staff is definitely a resource. So we are definitely here to help you through your project development. We're project developers support, as I always like to say, projects, and y'all probably aware of this as well. These are very organic things, and they can shift and move and mold into different things as you go through the process of thinking through this at your own institutions. And then if you're accepted into the project, then we're definitely there with you to help you shape and mold it as well. We also have a number of resources too on our Science Religion Dialogue.org website. I think Katie is going to put that in the chat as well. And we have a number of examples. You can just go to our resource hub, and you can search whatever you like to search, say theology and cosmology, and there'll be a number of resources that come up, syllabi and the like, and video resources and interviews that we've done through our engaging scientists work, where you'll see examples of that. And other areas, and other we have our Science to Wide Angle video series where they may give you ideas. We use those as pedagogical tools as well. So there's a number of resources on our website as well inside. And there's other resources that are not within our Dozer website, but are part of AAAS. As Katie mentioned, we have a very strong programmatic arm here at AAAS. We have folks like SciLine, which focus on a number of cutting edge issues that help journalists. So they have a number of interviews with scientists that may give you an idea as well. You have the Epicenter, which focuses on a number of policy issues too. And then external organizations. We have a number of y'all, or I've heard some mentioned here just this afternoon in regards to external organizations, the BioLocals, the Wesley Nexuses, ASA is another one. This has been mentioned here. They all have wonderful resources that you can really look through that might give you ideas in regards to project themes, project topics, and the like. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Mr. Leif Castron. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to see you. I'm going to go over some of the details for this open call for applications and proposals that brings you to here. There will be two cohorts of this program. One that is open now and will begin in January of next year, and a second cohort, excuse me, that we're hoping to, pardon me, that we're hoping to kick off next September and have run through the following summer, or 2 summers out. Each cohort will be 4 to 10 projects, depending on, pardon me, depending on how many proposals we get and how budgets shake out. The cohort 1 project timeline, which is the upcoming, as you may have seen, applications close and are due about a month from now. So November 10th is the due date. And a bit over a month from then, we will announce our decisions. December 13th is our date for that. For those applicants who receive that award in the first cohort, we will have a virtual kickoff in late January and an in-person workshop in Washington, D.C. at the end of February. So if you're interested in the grant in this iteration, make sure you look closely at those dates and are available to join us then. Those will be requirements of the cohort. And then the grant period, as has been mentioned, will run for 24 months. And at some point, we will have a in-person retreat that will include both cohorts. Next slide, please. So in addition to the set of resources that Curtis mentioned, the project development support from our staff, there is some other support that we will give to grantees. A critical element of this that's been mentioned is science advisors. You can choose and select science advisors who you're already connected with or would like to connect with, or we can help recruit science advisors to your project. And external to the project budget, Dozer will provide honoraria for 2 science advisors. Project leaders will also receive a 2-year electronic subscription to Science Magazine. As I mentioned, we have a number of kickoff meeting, an in-person workshop, and a retreat that are meant to help build relationships between and across projects and allow for resource sharing. And then we make sure to have periodic check-ins to distribute evaluation tools such as pre and post-course surveys, and our communications associate will help with press releases and coordinating announcements about the project. So for the application requirements, as has been mentioned, this is a grant for continuing education and or lifelong learning providers. Those providers should be associated with an accredited seminary or a denominational or judicatory body. Other appropriate institutions may include other types of educational organizations or denominational organizations, and those will be assessed on a case-by-case basis. So if you don't fall into an accredited seminary or Christian theological school or a denominational or adjudicatory body, you can reach out to us and we can have a conversation. And you may be considered, but those are the main buckets. Curtis has gone over the pilot projects and given some examples of project titles, but you can be creative with those, and that's an important way to kind of frame your interests and approach to engagement with science. The project leader should be one of the leads in developing and providing the continuing education or lifelong learning course. And we always love to see teams of faculty collaborating in a proposal. Proposals will need to have a letter of support from the leadership of the organization that the continuing education or lifelong learning program is connected to. We ask as part of the application for a description of both the organization applying and the constituency or the audience for the project, and then a description of project activities. So there should be a continuing education or lifelong learning programmatic activity and some clarity around goals, objectives, and the type of impacts that are expected, as well as a timeline. We've mentioned the budget range. That is to your discretion. Whatever number you end up choosing as your total budget, no more than 15% of that total should be allocated to overhead charges. As I mentioned, Dozer will provide honoraria to 2 science advisors, but you're welcome to allocate more funds to those advisors as well as other external participants, speakers, that you might include in your project. A clear and detailed budget narrative is helpful to help us understand what each budget line will do in relation to your project activities. And if you have at the outset or are able to garner matching funds at any point, we like to know about that. It certainly helps us. Next slide, please. In terms of how proposals will be reviewed, these are our criteria. So clarity and completeness of all components of the application will be evaluated. The positive substantial impact this project will make, how this project is uniquely suited to the context of your educational constituency. So thinking about who your audience is and how your project is uniquely catered to meet their needs is a very important aspect of our evaluation of the quality of proposals. The ability of project leadership and other personnel who are named in the proposal to carry out the project. The commitment of the organization or institution, that'll come through in the letter of support from a leadership figure in the organization, and the impact and sustainability of the project beyond the grant period. If a program can develop that will be able to be sustained beyond the 24-month term, that's of course a big bonus in terms of the impact we can generate. Next slide. That closes out our information. I hope you've seen the links that have been shared and know how to reach Curtis and myself if you have questions later. But we are here to answer your questions now. So please put questions in the chat or raise your hand if you would like to ask something.
A couple of things I want to highlight actually before we get into the questions that got mentioned, but I just want to make sure that you're kind of aware of them. One is that we really hope that you'll be thinking within your context of what types of science engagement will be meaningful for the leaders that you serve through your project. And so we are leaving the choice of scientific discipline and approach up to you. And even we've kind of used continuing ed course as shorthand here, but if the way that you offer lifelong learning, it takes different forms than that, that is also, that's also appropriate. And I also just wanted to note that as both Leif and Curtis mentioned, we are really committed to this being an organic process and recognizing that science engagement may be new for you or for many of your constituents. And so we want to know that you have been thinking about what will be meaningful and how you might be able to do it within your context. But if you don't have every single detail worked out before you submit your proposal, that is okay. We will definitely help you in the project along the way. And we also understand that, of course, as things go on, plans end up changing, and there is flexibility for you know, updating budgets and everything like that. So let's see. I see Fred has his hand raised. Yes, if they've got if they are offering lifelong learning for congregational leaders, yeah. It might, if they have programs that are focused on congregational leadership. So some secular universities may also offer continuing education programs for congregational leaders. But one of the things that we do need to see is that this wouldn't be just completely in isolation, that it wouldn't be, we do need to see that it's connected to a larger program of lifelong learning for congregational leaders. So if you are interested in this project, but you don't have, you don't currently work for an organization that offers those sorts of things, you may be able to find a partner who is a provider of continuing education and say, hey, there's this grant opportunity. I would love to be part of it. I would say in that case, project leaders, the project leader who submits the application should be connected with the organization, but certainly there is space for additional project leaders, and how leadership works in the context of the project itself may vary. Does that make sense? It could, again, if they have an established program of offering lifelong learning for congregational leaders already, then that would be great. If they don't, then again, we would suggest partnering with an organization that has some experience in that realm. Certainly, if there are folks that you wanted to include within a proposal, you could, but that is not necessary to have folks say already, like, I will sign up for this if you get this grant. We recognize that that's asking quite a bit. But again, that's why we are hoping to partner with folks who have experience in this area, so that they have an idea that this will be something that will be meaningful and of interest to them. Yeah, Curtis, you look like you were.
Oh, so I was going to say yes, but yes, that is possible, and there's opportunity there, but we won't tell you which way to go in that regard. So I think that's so short answer, yes. And I think the long answer would be talking about how that would impact and how that would sort of engage and help that congregation as well. I think that is we're definitely open to that. Did that make sense, Steve? But it'd be fascinating, and I'll add this, as you saw with Andover Newton, they had I don't think there was anybody in their project, and then the pastor attendant were doctors. However, there was a doctor leading, as I mentioned before, and it proved quite helpful to those who are participating. Talked about a number of projects there. And one area that doesn't get a lot of mention is engineering, and how that is important as well in regards to just context as well.
I think any of that would be appropriate. We would like to see that there is going to be some possibility for continuing impact on your constituency. It doesn't necessarily have to be like completely public facing. It could be continuing a course that's been developed, or if there were resources that came out of it, it might be, hosting those on the website that others could use. It could take a lot of forms. One thing that we would like to ask you to think about is accessibility. If you are if you do offer, say, courses that generally are paid offerings, we would really encourage you for the first offering to find a way to make that at no cost or very low cost to participants. If then, as part of the sustainability of the project, it becomes part of the fully paid course offerings, that's completely appropriate. But we would encourage you to think about making sure that whatever you're developing, at least for its initial offering, will be accessible to as many folks as possible.
And thank you for mentioning that, Katie. That reminds me that all the 4 pilot projects, all the opportunities were cost-free. And even at some institutions, say for instance, Andover, Newton, and at Concordia, where folks had to travel, they gave them a little stipend that they had to come to something in person. But of course, you can sort of null and void that if you want to offer something online as well.
We had a question in the chat about what items should be included in the proposed budget. I'm going to put post a link to some budget examples and guidelines that we have on the website that kind of gives you an idea of categories. And again, recognizing that you may not get down into quite the level of granularity with this at the outset, but appropriate budget categories do include staff time for development, if there are costs associated with hosting your offering, whether that's online or in person, if there does need to be some budget outlay to kind of compensate if you are making what would normally be a paid course unpaid, including that in there. If there will be travel involved, honoraria, there's lots of different categories. Travel is mentioned in there already, but somebody did ask in the chat, and I just want to reiterate that the workshop in February, we will pay for all of those expenses, all of the travel, lodging, meal expenses associated with that. So that does not need to be included in the budget.
There was also a question in the chat about children's ministry and youth pastors and whether programs that serve those kind of folks would qualify.
Yeah, and they definitely would. Congregational leaders is kind of the catch-all category we are using to describe this, but those do not necessarily have to be the senior preaching pastor or anything like that. It could be leaders of children or youth ministry. It could be lay leadership. It could be clergy. One thing that I will note, because this is funded through the Lilly Endowment, the focus is on Christian communities. If you have offerings that also might reach folks from other religious traditions, that's perfectly appropriate. But for the purposes of this grant, the main focus should be on engaging leadership within Christian communities and congregations. And again, one of the things that we found in evaluating our Science for Seminaries program, which was very successful in helping students feel more comfortable in engaging with science when congregants brought questions to them. They understood how science kind of intersected with their ministry, but many of them reported that they didn't necessarily feel equipped to proactively engage with these issues within their congregation. So we'd like you to keep that in mind about how are you equipping and empowering congregational leaders to bring this back to their congregation. So not just kind of intellectually understand how science and theology might go together for their own reflection, but also how they can bring it into the life of their congregation. That is, if you are working within a judicatory or a denomination, and those are the folks that you serve, that is perfectly fine and appropriate. If you work with an organization that provides offerings to folks across religious traditions, that is also fine. Certainly. And this is also one of the reasons we ask for a little bit of a description of your organization and your constituency in the application. We would much prefer for something to be very useful and relevant to a particular group of people than say, oh, we're going to try and reach everybody, and in doing so, it's going to be so broad that it doesn't actually have much practical use for folks. That is not at all a requirement to already have scientists on board. if there are folks that you know you want to work with, or even have an idea that you want to work with, certainly do note that in your proposal. But if you don't, if you say, we know our leaders are really interested in this topic, we have no idea who could talk to them about it, that is part of what we do for you, is help connect you with scientists and science resources. Even if you just want to say, we might reach out to these folks, if you haven't yet. There will be another cohort open, and we don't have the precise dates. A couple of people have asked, but it will open generally in the summer of 2025 is when the applications for the second cohort will open. If you decide you want to wait till then, or if you want to apply now, if you are not selected in the first cohort, there is no problem with applying for the second cohort. Not really. I mean, that may come up in the review process, but our previous experience has been that even if projects are addressing the same general discipline, often approaches are very different. The way that they are bringing that into conversation is very different. So I'm not super concerned about that. All right. I've put the links again and in the chat directly to the application materials. It's a jot form application, and you should be able to start it and save it and come back. Just do make sure you hit the submit button before the deadline. Even if you have it all filled out, we will not be able to see it if you don't hit the submit button. As well, we are available. Curtis and Leaf are available to answer questions. If you have ideas you want to toss around, we are more than happy to help talk through those with you. And please, if you've got colleagues that you think might be interested, feel free to pass along the information as well. Also, I'll point out in the chat, both Grace and Fred put their email addresses in there as folks who have worked as advisors for previous projects. So if one of them might be helpful to you, please do reach out to them. And Leaf, Curtis, do you have any?
Like I mentioned, I guess the big thing is think about there's not just one. It's not a. It's not a one size. Is it a one size? Not a one size fit all.
Yeah.
Models and frameworks are very different, so lean into that. It doesn't have to be like, as Katie mentioned, courses or whatever it may be. Just think about that. As I mentioned, leverage your network, know context, and just keep in mind potential partners, either within your institution or outside your institution as well. And think about what's already there that you could think about sustainability and impact. If there's some things already working well there within the institutions, think about how to engage with those things and make them even better with this as well. That's all I have. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. We're looking forward to hearing from you. And again, please feel free to reach out if other questions occur to you.
Thank you, Katie.
Everybody.